So, a couple weeks ago, I was driving down South Yale Avenue in Tulsa, heading north, and middle of a day, nice sunny day, stopped at the light at 51st and Yale, and I saw this guy standing across the street from me on the corner, leaning up against the post, waiting for the crosswalk sign to change. And I was getting a kick out of this guy just looking at him. He was probably mid-60s, white guy, big full white beard, sun hat, sunglasses, and a traditional green plaid Scottish kilt. And so I watched this guy sitting there, already slightly bemused, and his light changes and he starts across the street. And just as he starts across the street, this driver tries to turn right into the crosswalk, right in front of him. And I watched this guy very calmly turn, look the driver right in the eye, put his hand up with great authority, shake his head, as if to say, no, not your turn, it's my turn. This is my crosswalk. You will wait. And lo and behold, the driver did. And the man turned, his head held high and his chest puffed up, looking very confident. He strode across the street. And a couple days later, I was working on one of my numerous final papers at the coffee house on Cherry Street, which I highly recommend if you are ever in Tulsa. Shameless plug. And it's a very nice day. As you may recall, spring took a little while getting here this year, and so I was really enjoying the outside, sitting out on the patio with my computer, kind of watching the world go by while I worked. And across the street, I saw a guy park his car, young, hipster-looking guy, get out of the car, slung his backpack on his shoulder, and then proceed to dance his way across the street and dance his way right into the coffee shop. And I watch him, also very, very bemused, and I see my fellow patrons sitting around looking at him like, oh boy.
And I can see some scorn on people's faces, I can hear some whispering, some skepticism, some outright annoyance with this dancing guy, but I'm looking at him and I'm totally enamored. I fall right in love with that guy as well. And this happens to me countless times a day if I'm paying attention. I fall in love with people all the time, love at first sight. Whether it's somebody walking down the street in costume months away from Halloween, or little kids playing under a coffee table, or joggers passing by having an interesting conversation, I fall in love with people all the time. And so I must confess that I'm completely, totally in love with humanity. And, you know, don't tell. Humanity might be a little shy, and I wouldn't want to embarrass it or anything. Although frequently, when I confess my love, I do get this kind of look from people. And when I get that look, I know what's coming next. They say, alright, so, Stephen, you're in love with humanity. Well, that's
cute and all. You know, guys in kilts, people dancing in the streets, kids on their coffee tables, that's all sweetness and light and bunnies and butterflies and rainbows. But what about the rest of humanity? What about the atrocities? What about humanity's inhumanity to humanity? What about war? Young people going off and dying for old people's causes. What about the Holocaust? Slavery? Isn't all that part of humanity as well? And I say, yeah, it is. And yet, I continue to be in love with humanity. Because here's the thing about being in love. You don't get to pick and choose the parts that you're in love with. In a healthy marriage, one spouse doesn't say to the other, you know, honey, I love you except when you leave your socks on the floor. Or I love you except when you've had a bad day and you snap at me. Or I love you except when you've been depressed for a few months and I don't really know how to reach you anymore. Because all those things hurt because we love them. All those things frustrate us because we love them. And it's part of the package. We can't help but continue to love them because what else can you do when you're in love? Likewise, a loving parent doesn't say to their children, You are the apple of my eye, the light of my life, and I love you to death except when you don't pick up your room. Or I love you dearly except when you throw temper tantrums in public. Or you are the most life-giving thing in my life, and I love you to the bottom of my heart except when you talk back to me. Because all those things frustrate us, and the kids may drive us nuts at times. But we love them anyway, because they're ours. And so we don't get to pick and choose the parts that we love. It's kind of a whole package deal. It's the both and. I love both the good parts and the bad parts. I love both the healthy parts and the unhealthy parts. I love both the pretty parts and the ugly parts. And I imagine that this is what is meant when we see scriptural references to humanity making up God's body. That metaphor of God loving each part of God's self. And this can apply whatever your conception of God or a higher power is, whether we're talking about an outside deity or the sum total of the universe. God loves each part of God's body as I must love each part of my body to keep it healthy, whole, and functional. Because even though my heart, my appendix, and my toenail all serve different functions in my body, any one of them going off kilter affects everything else in my body. Sure, I'm going to notice the heart first. The heart's going to take a more drastic toll on me if it goes out. Because probably too late to do anything about it by the time I notice that. But the appendix, which to the best of our knowledge no longer serves any purpose in our body, is still there. It's still part of our body, and it still definitely affects everything else if it gets sick. And so even this part that doesn't seem to do anything has a large effect on the whole body. And if you want to get down to the toenail, if you've ever had a toenail injury, you might be very well aware that a little bitty thing can suddenly become a very big thing. It affects everything. It affects the way you walk. It affects the way you carry yourself. When it affects the way you walk, it affects the way you hold your back, and then you get a headache, and then you feel bad all day. So one little thing makes a huge difference. And that's just on the micro level of my one human body. Now let's go to the macro level. Let's look at the cosmos, the entire universe. In that system, you've got planets, stars, nebulas. You've got all the big stuff. You've got the gases and the atoms and the elements getting down further, smaller and smaller. And sure, if a star supernovas, it's going to have major effects on everything around it for hundreds of thousands of light years, and for hundreds of thousands of years, because it changes the chemical makeup of everything, and it causes a ripple effect. But the same thing happens on the nuclear level. If one little proton decides to jump rings, you've got a new element. And if one of those protons decides to join with a neutron over here from another atom, you've got a new compound. Something new has been created. Something has changed. Change happens on the nuclear level. And so when we think that one little thing doesn't make a difference, we're very wrong. Little bitty things make all the difference. Which brings me back to the middle level. So we've gone to the micro level, which is one human body. We've gone to the macro level, which is the entire cosmos. And the middle level brings us back to humanity, the body of humanity. And it brings me back to the both and. Because when I love humanity, when I fall in love with humanity, and I love the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I love both the pretty parts and the not-so-fun parts, and the downright horrific and atrocious parts, it's because they all make up the whole body of humanity. And if I am to do healing work in this world, which I believe that we are all called to do in some way or another, it's just a matter of finding which way. I have to go to the darker places. I have to go to the broken places, because that's where the healing takes place. And that is where that nuclear subatomic change takes place, is in those dark places. And the only way to enact that change is to love the people involved enough to love them into wholeness and to bring them out of the brokenness. I have to be willing to love without conditions. In the Hebrew Bible, which is a term that we prefer for the Old Testament these days because old tends to indicate outdated, antiquated, nothing good in there. And there's so much richness in there. That reading I started off our meditation with was from the Hebrew Bible. There's a word that appears over 200 times. In Hebrew it's called chesed. Chesed is something that doesn't have a direct English translation, but it roughly translates to steadfast love, covenantal love, unconditional love, and generally refers to the two-way flow between God and humans or among humans. That love that will not die, as Pema Chodron puts it. And that chesed first appears as a word right after the Great Flood, when God makes the promise to Moses that God will never again wipe out all of humanity. Because God realizes that God has made a mistake. God realizes that when God hurts God's own creation, or when God hurts others, God hurts God's self. Because again, we are all part of the whole, part of God's body, part of the universe, part of the cosmos, part of the system. And so the first promise, the first covenantal love promise that God makes to humanity is that no matter what, no matter how bad we get, no matter how poorly we treat each other, God will never wipe us out again. And that means that it's our responsibility to take care of each other, and it is our responsibility to heal those parts that cause us to hurt each other, that lead to that brokenness, that lead to that to those dark places. And so when I say I'm in love with humanity, I don't just mean I'm in love with the dancing guy, and I'm in love with the guy with the kilt, and I'm in love with the cute little kids playing. I mean that I'm in love with the driver who shot kilt guy a nasty look when he stopped him in traffic. I mean that I'm in love with the people around me who were looking at dancing guy like he had two heads. And I'm like, oh, what's he going to want? I just want to enjoy my coffee in peace. I don't want to be associated with this person, leave me alone. And those are the easy ones. Those are the easy ones to love. You know, it's harder when we get into things like war and slavery and the Holocaust. It's harder to love those on the perpetrating end of those things. And yet I can't look at the perpetrators without also seeing those who are working so hard for change. I can't look at war without seeing soldiers that I know personally who go into these terrible, terrible situations determined to make some sort of positive difference in the situation that they're in, determined to make some sort of positive impact on the people that they interact with, determined to do some good in the worst of situations. That's the beauty of humanity. I can't look at the Holocaust without looking at the righteous Gentiles who helped guide Jews and Gypsies and LGBT people through underground systems at risk of their own life and limb, and often losing their own lives because it was the right thing to do. That is also humanity, just as much as the inhumanity of the Nazis is humanity. And I also can't look at any of these perpetrators, be they at the level of Hitler or the level of a murderer or the level of somebody who just says something nasty to somebody else, without seeing myself reflected. Because we are all part of the same body. We are all part of humanity. And we lie to ourselves when we think that we can't be like that. And so the solution for me always goes back to love. It always goes back to falling in love with humanity every chance I get. Because when I make that decision every day, I get to decide I'm going to do healing work instead of hurting work today. I'm going to do whatever I can on the nuclear level today. Because what else can you do when you're